You want me for my body.
No, I want you because you don't beg.
You want me for my body, she accused. The cowboy said, no, I want you because you don't beg. Wind walks barefoot through the pine ridges, leaving the bitter taste of pine resin on my tongue like an unspoken vow. It's 1879, on the edge of a land outsiders call wild, but I call the in-between. Here, the bald hills cradle the sky like an old wound, and I carry echo through the red dust. My tattered dress speaks for what my mouth no longer has the strength to say, torn seams for torn days, my bleeding lips a hurried seal on fate's contract. Each step is a signature, each breath a stamp fee to leave. Echo sleeps soundly on my shoulder, his breath touching my collarbone as gently as dewfall. The 6-year-old, his eyes round like two lost sunbeams in the night, is worn out more by exhaustion than by peace. I can hear his stomach rumbling, the sound of his hunger tapping on my ribs like someone knocking on night's door, hoping to be let in. I console him with my left hand while my right clutches the darkness, afraid it will slip away and expose parts of a life I don't want to see. I jumped from the freight wagon like a person jumping from a burning story, without looking back, carrying only the single character I had the strength to protect. In my home village, barefoot women braid their hair with fragrant leaves when the rainy season comes, wearing woven talismans embroidered with red thread to remind themselves of the way back. I have no such talisman now, only calluses on the soles of my feet, like a self-drawn map of an exile. The distant beat of the seasonal drum is replaced by the dry, rattling sound of wind in my throat and the whisper of stones clashing under my heels. Go on, don't stop. Perhaps that is how the land advises a woman. Take another step. Don't ask why the road has never been kind. As the sun slips below the horizon like a late-paid coin, I see a trembling light on the hillside, the livery stable. The yellow lamplight in the night's eye is a hook cast from a safe shore. It catches on the part of me that still wants to live. I hold Eco tight, and the wind whispers in my ear, its voice hoarse like an old man's. Just knock. I don't. I push my shoulder against the door. The hinges sigh softly. The smells of dry hay, horse sweat, grease, and old wood breathe out all at once, covering me in a rough but warm blanket. There's a man inside, his back as broad as another door opening into silence. He's grooming a stallion, his movement steady, the brush sweeping like water over stones. Persistent, not grudging. He looks up. His gaze isn't a knife. It's an upturned bowl, waiting. I say, my voice scraped like bark, I'm not looking for trouble. He replies slowly, as if speaking to the weather. You look like you carried it here. Get inside, before the wind blows you down. His name is Jared. I learn this later. But then, he is just a pair of hands setting down a brush, a blanket pulled from a pile of hay, a cool tin cup touching my lips like a dry baptism. The water travels down my throat, a fire-quenching stream strangely. It both extinguishes and kindles. I watch Eco. He rests his head on a coil of rope, curled up like a small heart that's found its rhythm. I lie down beside him, afraid to pull my hand from his back, as if letting go would make him slip from the earth. What's your name? His voice is the long shadow of a man who's been in the sun too long. Coco. I count the syllables on my tongue, like counting the broken bamboo bridges behind me. He's Anaru. How far did you come? Far enough to forget how to measure. He asks nothing more. His silence is a bottomless bowl. I pour my gasps of breath into it, and it never overflows or buckles. He spreads out a blanket, pulls a pile of straw closer to the charcoal stove. His small actions, stacked one on top of the other, become a wooden ladder for my mind to climb out of the hole. Some men you pay for with your body first. Some men you only need to pay with a steady gaze. I hold my eyes steady, to the point of pain. Night wraps the stable like a white bandage around a great wound. I hear the wind search through the plank gaps, hear the wood groaning like old people telling old stories. In the ashes, a piece of charcoal glows red. It's like the heart of a forgotten animal still beating, persistent despite everything. I place my hand on my chest, searching for my own heartbeat. It's there too, stubborn. I suddenly think, my heart is a barefoot drum that hasn't been beaten in a long time. Tonight, the only beat is Anaru's steady breath on my wrist, a bridge connecting two shores swept away by a flood. I was once taught, when traveling through a strange land, don't let the scent of fear cling to you. Wild animals can smell it. But some fears travel not by scent, but by sound. The sound of the past pulling up a chair and sitting beside you. It asks, "Are you sure?" I want to answer with strength, but my throat can only manage to close up. I turn my face to the plank wall. On the wood, long grain lines run like small paths. I choose one, imagining it leads back to my old village. My mother braiding her hair, a few fragrant leaves falling, their scent softly hitting my heart. Then the wood grain gets lost. I no longer recognize where my thoughts are going. Jared places something in a pot over the fire, a soft bubbling sound like first rain on a thatched roof. He doesn't look at me as he says, "You can sleep. It's safe here." The words, "it's safe," are a well, and I stand on the edge, afraid that if I look down, I'll see my own face in the water, the woman I've tried so hard not to look at. I say softly, "I can work, wake up early, clean." I'm not asking for charity. The last words fall from my lips like stones, small, but they ripple the surface. He nods, slowly, as if nodding to the stable post itself. "I don't want you to ask for charity," he adds after a long pause. "I want you to breathe." That sentence crosses the night like a low-flying bird. I see it, but I don't dare reach out. Some things you must let fly, to know you can still look up. I close my eyes, and the darkness softens a little, as if it, too, is tired after a long day. In my drifting dreams, I see barefoot footprints on the sand, each print a cup turned over to hide tears. I see the hands of that other man, the one who promised my son and I a ride, turn into a malicious wind, sweeping through the fields and snapping dry grass with a crackle. I wake with a start. The charcoal stove is still warm. Anaru turns over. His small hand finds mine, touches it, and is still. Morning arrives like a late postman, slipping a golden envelope under the door. I open my eyes and read. The smell of damp hay, the snorting of horses, the biting chill of the mist, and in the corner of the stable, a tin cup, with condensation still clinging to it. Jared is already up perhaps, like every day before I came to set the world right again. I fold the blanket, neatly stack the straw, and grab a shovel. My first action on this strange land is to shovel horse manure. It dirties my hands, but strangely, it cleanses something else in my mind, the limbo between leaving and staying. Labor is the simplest metaphor for belonging. You touch the land, and the land touches you. Anaru sits on a bundle of straw. Jared gives him a piece of wood and a small, dull knife. "Whittle away, kid," he says, as if he's said it 1,000 times. My son smiles a bright smile on the face of the leftover night and begins to scrape, the wood gradually revealing the shape of a bird. I look at that shape and think about myself. Perhaps I am just a piece of wood in the hands of life, and life's knife is dull. That's okay. A dull knife is less likely to make me bleed. When the sun climbs a little higher, I stand outside the stable yard. The daytime wind blows different tales than the night wind. It speaks with a clearer voice. Here, no one knows the name of your fear. You can give it a new one. I try to rise on my toes, like a barefoot person learning to walk on a newly tilled field, afraid of sinking. My feet still remember the way. My bones still beat out the old song. I smile to myself. The woman who walked through the night is now learning to walk in the day. Jared is sharpening a nail by the broken fence. He takes off his hat, and sweat runs like a salty thread down his cheek, glistening. He looks at me, not prying, just confirming my existence. "You all right?" I nod. For a moment, I see a thin thread stretched between us, not a thread to tie, but a clothesline where people hang their wet things in the sun to dry. I want to hang my fear there, but my hands are still damp. Jared. I say his name for the first time, testing its warmth on my tongue. "I'm not paying you back with things you didn't ask for." He puts the hammer down, standing straight like a tree adjusting its shadow. I don't want a favor. I want your breakfast to fill you, and for the boy to smile. His simple sentences are like nails driven into the wind, holding the roof of the day from blowing away. I don't know what to believe in, but I can believe in the way a man chooses his verbs. I want your breakfast to fill you, not I want you to be good, not I want you to be pretty. I smile softly at the words. They are little birds, landing on the fence of my heart, unafraid of being shooed away. Noon arrives, and the warmth pours down onto the ground like a patched-up quilt. Anaru falls asleep again, the wooden bird's beak not quite finished. I pull the blanket over him, my hands cupped like wings. I sit with my back against a post, looking out at the field where the wind plants small flags in the grass, the blades of grass bowing in unison as if greeting a newcomer. I close my eyes, and in that gentle darkness, I hear my mother's distant voice. Coco, don't beg the sky. Talk to the earth. I place my palms on the stable floor, feeling the tiny warmth of the earth particles running from the wood to my hands, like ants carrying sunlight. When I open my eyes, I see Jared sitting opposite me at a safe distance. He holds his tin cup, turning it slowly. Our eyes meet, not dramatically, just like two travelers casually giving way to each other on a narrow bridge. I open my mouth, something that has been waiting for an opportunity to burst out for a long time. You don't want me for my body, do you? That question is my shadow, following me for years, and only now does it stop. He shakes his head, but he's not in a hurry. I want you because you don't beg. His voice isn't a lesson or a threat. It tells a simple truth about how he sees me. The words fly straight like an arrow without a tail feather. No wobbling, no scattering. They embed themselves in the wall I've built around myself, not to break it, but to hang a lantern. The light is faint, just enough for me to see that my trembling hands have calmed. I don't say thank you. The word thank you can easily turn into kindling, catching fire when it meets the wind of doubt. I just nod, and in that nod, I initiate an experiment. I'll try living here one more night. Try to let Anaru's laugh grow a little louder. Try to believe one short sentence. Outside, the clouds tear a small sliver of light, as if someone has gently ripped a seam in the sky to change the thread. The light falls into the stable, resting on the wooden floor like a fish learning to breathe on land. I know, something very small has shifted inside me like a tiny splinter, after many days, finally retreating from the flesh. The afternoon stretches its wrist and touches me with a cool fingertip. I wrap a scarf around my head, and the scent of my home's fragrant leaves suddenly returns not from the scarf, but from a memory that has been unlocked. I tell myself in my head, in the barefoot language, listen, Coco, the wind has shown the way. The rest is up to your feet. And I step into the evening with feet that still ache, but are less afraid. In one corner of the stable, the charcoal stove glows red like a chest waiting for a hand to be placed on it, not for warmth, but to remember it still has heat. In another corner, Anaru breathes steadily. In the space between, the man named Jared makes silence a thing with shape, color, a place to sit. I pull the rough blanket over my shoulders. Night comes again, no longer with the edge of a pursuer, but of a watchman. I close my eyes. Beside my ear, the sounds of wood, horses, and wind form a wordless lullaby. And in that silent song, I know. A stranger has touched the door, not me, but peace. It doesn't push. It just places a small shoe on the doorstep of my heart to say, tomorrow, if you want, put it on. I smile in the darkness. Barefoot people are accustomed to going barefoot, but perhaps, to stay, one must learn to walk differently. I will learn, tomorrow, here, on this foreign land that is slowly writing my name. The mornings that follow arrive like homing birds, landing on the windowsill of my mind without a call. I wake before the rooster's song can open the sun's eye, my feet fumbling on the wooden floor like a blind person reading the bass notes of a plank church. The stable at dawn is a breathing stomach. The smell of dry hay, the dampness of wood, the heavy coppery scent of sweat, all stirring slowly, then settling with the sound of my shovel scraping. I shovel horse manure like someone cleaning up a story. Each shovel scoop is a line of text crossed out, each weary breath a blank space between the torn pages of a life. Jared doesn't talk much. He appears at the edge of the morning like the shadow of a post, steady and gentle. He gives me a bucket, a pair of gloves, sometimes a rope tied with care. These small things stack up, enough to form a bamboo bridge to cross the swamp of doubt in my chest. Anaru sits cross-legged on a bundle of straw, his hand holding the dull knife Jared gave him, scraping the wood into the shape of a short-necked bird. It seems to be a sparrow, or a species yet to be named, a species that only flies inside a stable. He looks at me, as if asking, "Are you okay, Mom?" I nod, and his smile falls like a coin into the well of a new day, making ripples just wide enough for me to see that I am not invisible. Cooking in that black pot, I begin to understand why fire is called the old friend of the barefoot people. It knows how to listen, how to be silent, how to take a step back when the wind pulls the curtain. I stir a pot of corn porridge, the steam rising white like river mist, wrapping around my forehead and then dissipating, leaving a salty streak that isn't from tears. Jared adds more wood, his movements precise like a man adding a period to a long sentence. "Eat," he says, his eyes not demanding a response. I scoop out 3 bowls, placing them on a flat board that serves as our table. We eat like travelers sharing a doorstep but not crowding each other, each holding on to their own silence like warming a pouch of beans inside their coat. Sometimes, the wind blows through the plank gaps, arranging the straws on the floor like someone's hand brushing a tired girl's hair. Sometimes, the horse snorts pull me back to my own body, reminding me that I am still here, still heavy, still capable of putting things down and picking them up. In those moments, I feel my heart sprouting tiny wildflowers, like the kind of beggar ticks that haven't yet dared to cling to anyone's clothes. I don't believe in peace yet, but I am starting to believe in routine. Waking, cleaning, cooking, washing, teaching Anaru to piece together the scattered letters from my memory. Routine is the time needle of the poor, turning slowly, but never stopping. "You don't have to do it all," Jared says when I struggle to pull an oversized bundle of straw. "My hands must be busy," I reply. When my hands are idle, my mind runs off on its own, and it usually chooses a bad place to go. He nods, not smiling. His nod is like a stake driven deeper into the earth, making no sound, just becoming firm. At noon, the sun is like tissue paper hung out on the fence. I take the laundry out, scrubbing the fabric in a basin of cold water until my hands crack. The soap suds Jared gave me yesterday sit on the water's surface like little eyes, watching me without judgment. I think of my mother, remember the woven talisman she used to hang on the porch, and her words, "When you don't know who to trust, trust the folds you make." I fold Anaru's shirt into a neat square, like building a small wall to keep the wind out. Jared hangs up the clothesline, releasing the wooden clothespins like releasing little birds. On the other side of the line, something has changed color. The sky is a little bluer, the straw a little yellower, and my view of this day's life is a little deeper, as if a drop of ink has been added. I am still suspicious, not because he's done anything wrong, but because life has taught me. Kindness often comes with a hidden bill. On the second afternoon, as I'm washing bowls by the water spigot, a memory slams my face into the bottom of the basin, his hand twisting my wrist, his voice hoarse like rusty metal. "You thought you wouldn't have to pay." The cold water jolts me back up. Jared is standing far away, hammer in hand, nailing a plank to the fence. He doesn't look in my direction. That lack of a look isn't indifference. It's like a guard turning his back at the exact moment you're changing your clothes, so you can keep a little skin for yourself. I'm grateful for that turn back, a rare and cheap courtesy that everyone can offer but few remember. Evening comes, and the fire takes command of the room. It sits in the center of the house like an elder, murmuring with crackles. Anaru leans his head on my arm and sleeps, his hair flecked with straw dust like a small sky with pinprick stars. Jared sits opposite, his knife sharpening on a stone, small sparks flying like fish scales. I look at those sparks and think, my life, how many times have I been sharpened against other people's stones until my blade was chipped? I say, my voice not trying to hold back. Where I come from, people often make me tell my story. They call it empathy, but they're really counting what's left to take. The knife in Jared's hand stops, but the stone is not yet cool. I don't count, he says. I keep a different kind of ledger. What kind? A ledger of the times you breathe evenly. I laugh very softly. The laugh is a fragile bird, afraid of a human shadow. But this time, it stays on the clothesline a little longer. For 3 nights, I sleep without a start, not because the nightmares have left me, but because, when they come, they find I have a place to put my hands when I wake. The fire, the bucket, the shovel, the letters I'm painstakingly teaching Anaru from memory. I write with charcoal on a piece of wood. A for apple, B for bread, C for cozy. The letters are smudged, dark, but they stand, they don't lean. The boy reads haltingly, but each time he looks at me, his eyes are a little brighter. We haven't written the word home yet. That word needs more time for the ink to dry. On the 4th afternoon, the wind turns cold like an early fever pulling down the curtains. Overhead, a flock of black crows passes, leaving curved claw marks on the sky. I stand by the door, my hand gripping the wooden frame, feeling that I too am a door, once pushed, once kicked, once unlatched by a promise that changed its lock. Jared comes, placing a small bundle on the table, a piece of rough cloth, a needle, and a spool of thread. Mend the torn seams, he says, then goes to another corner to secure a post. I take the needle, thread it with trembling fingers, and sew the torn shirt like mending my own skin. Each stitch is a sentence I don't say aloud. I'm here. I haven't fallen apart. I still know how to mend. The stitching is uneven, in some places tangled like a bad thought, but strangely, in that tangle, I find my hands slowing down, becoming steadier, more persistent, the persistence born of poverty when abundance turns its back. Anaru runs in, showing off his first wooden bird with wings. Its wings are a little lopsided, like a person's fragile, lopsided dreams. I tell him, it's okay. Lopsided wings can still fly, just in a tighter circle. Jared looks at us, his eyes resting on the bird's wings, as if on a budding story. Tomorrow, he says, I'll teach him to make a kite. He looks at me for a reaction, like a man waiting for the wind. I nod, and that nod, small as it is enough for the first wind of the season inside the house. Night falls, and the rain begins to tap on the roof with cold fingers. I remember the barefoot village from seasons past, the rainy nights like endless mats, where we sat around the fire, listening to the elders tell stories of where the wind takes the voices of the forest when the season ends. The wind is a kind man, the elders would say, but he sleeps around. All the children would laugh. I didn't. I looked into the fire and saw the hands of another man, not the wind, not kind, only knowing how to flick ashes into a woman's hair. I pull Anaru close to my chest, feeling his heart like the brakes of a train that has just stopped. Hot. Are you cold? Jared asks, like a traveler asking a stream. I'm used to the cold, I say. It's the warmth that's strange. Then learn slowly, he replies. Warmth needs to be learned too. The next morning, I try to learn. I pull my chair a little closer to the stove, bringing my uncracked hands near the fire. The heat travels into my skin, then my blood, then into the deep rooms inside me where I hang my thin armor of harsh words for self-defense. I take one hook out and hang a little less. The heat doesn't demand a promise from me. It simply exists, like someone who understands you and chooses not to ask. I no longer name my fears. I name the things right in front of me. The bowl, the spoon, the wobbly table, the veins on Jared's hands as he lifts a bale of hay, the stray lock of hair that falls across Anaru's eyelid as he sleeps. Naming things is the barefoot way of fighting shadows. When a thing has a name, it has a shape, an edge, and can be placed on a table without breaking a teacup. I name trust, but still capitalize the T too much, the letter standing tall like a sail mast with no wind. Jared doesn't rush the boat. He just folds a piece of cloth and places it under the leg of my chair to make it steady. At noon, a man in a hat rides past the gate, looks in, and asks to buy hay. His voice is the kind that asks about things not in the question. I retreat behind the wall, my hand finding Anaru's back out of habit. Jared goes to the gate, saying and smiling little. The man leaves, leaving a short string of doubt wrapped around the post. Jared brings it in, unties it from the post, and throws it into a corner like a fallen feather. "It's fine," he says, "just enough for me to let out a breath." I realize, here, safety doesn't come like a fortress wall, but like small, timely actions, someone standing at the gate at the right moment, someone turning their back when you need it, someone saying it's fine in a voice that needs no proof. On the third day of our new life, Anaru brings me a handful of fallen chicken feathers from the corner of the stable, offering them like a bouquet. "Mom, I'm going to make a pillow for my kite," he says, believing in things he hasn't even learned correctly. I hug him and suddenly understand. A child doesn't carry the past like a bag of stones. He carries the future like a bag of seeds. The adult's job is to find the soil. I look at Jared. He's measuring a door frame, as if the whole world is a frame that can be adjusted to fit the people living in it. A warm question gathers on my tongue, waiting for its chance. That evening, when the stove is just red embers like the eyes of a sleeping cat, I say, "If I stay, for a while longer, what do you need from me?" Jared looks up, the firelight drawing a thin line on his cheekbones. "I need you to remember to breathe," he repeats, like a carpenter reminding himself to measure twice and cut once. "And if you have any breath left over, teach the boy to read. And you?" "I know how to read well enough to build a straight house." The other words, I listen for. That answer settles inside me like a well-fitting shirt, not too tight, not too loose. I nod, once again, and somewhere in the house, a nail straightens itself, a hinge creaks a little less. I lay out the blanket, put Anaru down, and lean my back against the post. Outside, the rain has stopped. The wind walks lightly, like an old friend. The fire has become a small red clump, but the warmth remains in the walls, in the floor, in my seat, a warmth that belongs to no one, but becomes shared when someone is present. I close my eyes, and for the first time since leaving my home, I no longer count what's lost. I count the small things that remain. A wooden bird with a lopsided wing, a tangled but unbroken thread, a clothesline hung high enough for clothes to dry without being stolen by the wind, a man who knows where to stand and when to be silent, a child who believes in a kite before there's a wind. These things, gathered together, become a fire just big enough to warm the part of me that has been soaked by the night. And in the last flicker of the embers, I make myself an unsigned promise. Tomorrow morning, I will learn to be a little warmer. Here, in this stable, beside these inanimate objects that are teaching me how to be human again through their veins. Winter arrives like a woman in a rough cloth dress, walking quietly but persistently, the scent of her breath blowing into the plank gaps, placing a cold bracelet on my wrist. The first snow falls thin as paper ash, so light that I almost believe it would melt if I breathed on it. But snow has its own kind of resilience. It clings, it packs, it layers, it turns footprints into new secrets. That morning, Jared opens the stable door, and the snow curls in like a curious white cat. He puts up another board to block the wind, then goes toward the tack room, the room that still smells of leather and boot oil. "It's warmer in here," he says, his voice like the softened hem of a coat. "I installed a small stove. It has a latch." The words latch touch an old place inside me. In the barefoot village, every door had a latch braided from leather strings, and when it was fastened, it made a clicking sound like an old person nodding. In the places I have traveled, there were many doors, but few latches. I step inside. The small stove is new, shiny black like a tamed beast. Anaru runs around, his cheeks flushed with the glow of the fire, making him look like an apple stored in straw. I try the latch. It clicks, a simple sound, enough to make my back unclench just a little. Snow doesn't rain. It just falls, without opinion, without argument, without stinging your face. But when the snow is thick enough, the noise of the world becomes muffled, as if stuffed with cotton. On the second morning in the small kitchen, I clearly hear myself breathe, a sound I thought had been stolen long ago. I cook porridge on the stove, the warmth drawn from the fire like a thin thread, wrapping around my wrists. The cracks in my skin are like little windows opening, waiting. Jared places a bag of flour, a bag of dried apples, and a bar of soap on the table, the smell of lye mixed with fat creating the feeling of an organized life. I traded some saddle oil for flour and soap, he says. Why do you always trade your share for us? Because I can still eat, even with half. And the two of you need enough to sleep. Some reasons are so concise that all you can do is chew them over in silence. I knead the dough, my hands sinking deep into the primal texture of the flour, as if sinking into a primitive kind of time where people use their fingers to mold the shape of their day back to life. Anaru stands beside me, flour clinging to his cheeks like the white marks of a tribe celebrating a festival. I remember the rainy nights at home, my mother teaching me to weave cloth talismans to hang on the porch, so the wind knows which house has people in it. I look at the stove smoke twisting upward, and I think, maybe smoke is also a kind of talisman. It tells the sky that people live down here. Please don't forget. In the afternoon, I use warm water to wipe the dry mud from Anaru's boots. The warmth fans onto his face, his eyes half closed, his lips slightly parted, sleep coming as softly as a young snake shedding its skin. When I lay him on the small bed, I hear the snow growing heavier on the roof, each clump gathering like the poor gathering rice. Peace, it turns out, also has the habit of the poor, collecting a little at a time, just enough for one meal. Jared sits on a block of wood by the door, carving a plank to make a joint fit. The wood shavings fall in swirls, smelling of the old forest. Someone once asked me why I didn't leave and keep going, I say softly, as if speaking to his back. If you keep going, the fear eventually ends. The end of fear doesn't mean the end of weariness. And staying? Staying is learning how to sit down without flinching. I look at the short wooden stool in the room, thinking it's the first lesson in wood. Don't wobble, don't rush. Wait for someone to come and sit. Wait a little longer for the warmth to seep into the wood. I try to sit longer than usual. In that silence, I hear Jared's slow, steady breathing, like a man counting nails. I suddenly want to ask about the loss of life that made his voice carry the scent of salt. He speaks first. I used to ride for a few cattle ranches, north to south. Then the smallpox took my brother that spring. I sat beside him, my hands useless except for counting his failing breaths. And you stayed ever since. I chose the thing that doesn't run, he replies. If you run for too long, your feet forget the land. If you run for too long, your feet forget the land. That phrase bounces into my chest like a skipping stone on water, each bounce a memory. The steep path where I slipped, my mother's face blurred by the rain, the wall of the boarding house, where men's laughter and women's cries were interwoven like a net. I look down at my calloused hands. They are two beasts that have learned not to roar, only to bite into work. One afternoon, in a heavy snowfall, a stranger on horseback stops at the gate, his hat pulled low, his voice slithering through his teeth like fire through wet coals. He asks questions that aren't in the questions. I stand behind the door, the latch fastened, my hand on Anaru's back, feeling his heartbeat mirroring mine like two people sparring in the shadows. Jared answers with short, dry sentences, as if each word is a stake driven deeper into the ground. The stranger leaves, leaving a curved hoofprint in the snow like the fingernail of someone who doesn't know how to caress. Your name? I heard someone asking about it at the outpost. Jared says that evening, as we sit by the stove. I didn't answer, just said that there was a stove and people here. I don't want to bring trouble. You didn't bring it, someone else did. That distinction between bringing and being brought to freeze a small wisp of air from my lungs. I look at the fire, wondering if any fire ever knows the difference between someone who adds wood and someone who pours water. I tell him the piece of my life that has been silenced, the half-hearted, half-drunk husband, the man who promised and then took my skin instead, the slaps euphemized into a quick temper, the bruises romanticized into an art installation on the flesh. Jared doesn't console, he adds more wood. The fire becomes louder. I can hear my own trembling subside. That night, Anaru dreams that his wooden bird is flying. He laughs in his sleep, flailing his arms, flapping at the air like a person rowing a boat in a dark room. I stroke his hair, feeling it sticky with sweat like grass wet with dew. I think about the word home. It's a difficult word. It has a roof, walls, and a door. I only have a latch. I'm missing a roof. But the roof can wait. First, there's the door, a door that opens at the right time and closes in the right place. Jared leaves the key on a hook, not hidden. That lack of hiding strangely becomes a form of trust. Something that is out in the open is difficult to use as a threat. The next morning he asks me, "You taught Anaru to read." I picked up letters from a general store when I worked in Missouri. The owner's wife taught me, said, "A woman who can read her bills is hard to deceive." I taught it to my son. "There are a lot of kids here whose parents are in the mines, and no one teaches them," he says. "If you want, you can teach them. In the chapel, on the empty days." I am holding a spoon, and it slips from the bowl, hitting the rim with a fragile sound like a needle breaking. They won't want a woman like me teaching their children. People don't forget fast, but they can learn slowly. I'm afraid my story will get up and walk into the room before I do. Then I will stand at the door. The story will be more polite. That sentence makes me want to cry in the way of a person who has run out of tears. The tears retreat inward, softening the gut. I look out the window, where the condensation looks like a frosted glass pane. Outside, the chickens peck at the snow for feed, leaving tiny claw marks like the signatures of children just learning to write. I suddenly imagine a blackboard, a box of chalk, the tangy scent of children's hands, the uneven sing-song of their voices, and me standing there, my hair tied back, reading slowly. A is for apple, B is for barn, C is for courage. The children will look at me not with the eyes of adults, eyes that always wear the glasses of old stories, but with round eyes, still believing in new things. That afternoon, Jared brings back a piece of rusty tin to make a weather vane for the chicken coop, he says, to show the boy that the wind can point the way. Anaru cheers, clapping his small hands. We sit at the table, hammering the tin flat. The hammering echoes through the roof, mixing with the sound of falling snow like grains of rice spilling into a sieve. I hold the tin, Jared hammers. Anaru counts. 1, 2, 3. With each strike, I think about the words that have struck me, which ones flattened me, which ones bounced off. Now, I see that hammering can also be a gentle act, teaching a thing its own shape, instead of forcing it to take the shape of another person. Late at night, the wind lets up like a horn player running out of breath. I blow out the lamp, but the firelight in the stove is still red. I lean my head against the wall, the blanket pulled up to my shoulders. In the hazy state between waking and sleeping, I hear the steps of winter along the roof, neither rushed nor late. It reminds me that some things arrive in their proper season. Just as the man under this small roof didn't come into my life like a storm, but like snow, falling softly, then accumulating, then becoming a flat surface where I can place my feet. The next morning, I walk past the blurry mirror on the wall. It's really just a polished piece of metal, and see my reflection. I fold my arms across my chest, not in a gesture of defense, but just to keep warm. The woman in the mirror is no longer a runner. She is a waiter, waiting for the dough to rise, for the water to boil, for the word home to come out of her mouth without stumbling. I pull my scarf over my head, tucking a stray lock of hair in place. On the table, Jared has left a new, round wooden button, with a sewing hole that fits the thread I still have out. "For the shirt you sewed," he says when he sees me holding it. A button to replace an old story. The snow continues to fall, but I've stopped counting the white flakes outside. I count other things. The number of times the door latch clicks, the number of spoonfuls of flour it takes to make a batch of biscuits, the number of letters Anaru reads clearly, the number of sentences Jared says that are short enough for me to place a small hymn of gratitude. In the afternoon, I stack a pile of firewood. The pile is a little crooked, so I prop it up with a small stick. Now it's straight. Barefoot people are like that. They fix what's leaning with a small support. No need to tear it all down and start over. On the last night of the first snowy week,